You're experiencing the Authentic Chaos Podcast, an exploration into our inner selves and journeys of self-discovery. I'm your host, Vahagan Yarnosian, and joining me again from New York this time, Yossi Katzin.
Hey folks. Hey Vahagan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm glad that we were able to meet up. I heard that you just got to New York, so thanks for making time.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks again for poking. It's always nice when I think there's a thing with ADHD. It might be a more general thing, but like the messages pile up and you keep them unread so that you can look at them again, but then maybe you never read them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I run into that problem too. And I don't have diagnosed ADHD, but I definitely feel like sometimes I get so many notifications. I will see that I got the notification, but I usually will absentmindedly look at my phone, and because I'm doing something else and I'm trying to be present in the thing I'm doing, or my phone isn't even near me and I don't look at my phone for hours, and so sometimes I miss notifications or forget to get back to people. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah, one of the things with all the AI that I want to work on, I don't know if I'll end up doing it, if I'll be able to, but I want to build a smarter notification system that can help you actually know what you have in a way that maybe prioritizes it, lets you know which things are important to you,
Yeah.
and like I guess coordinates across different apps as well, so that I can just see, okay, I've got these messages. I don't have to worry about all these different apps, all these different icons, and it can just tell me, computer, tell me.
Yeah. So actually, this topic is a great introduction to the bigger conversation I want to have, and we can start with this conversation about how technology has it has transformed the way we communicate. Before technology and even before letters and stuff, communication would be very in person. You're talking to someone, you're having a conversation, almost in the computing world we'd call it very synchronous. It's all at the same time. You're all you are meeting in real time, versus now with as technology has advanced, we've gotten a lot more asynchronous, where now you can send a message, you can have a conversation over the course of days, months, years even, and people can take as much time as they need to actually get to your notification and respond.
So you're talking about, and that's been true since, as you mentioned, letters
Oh
have been
yeah.
around, right? Ever since we had cuneiform tablets, we've been communicating. Have you heard of that? The oldest customer complaint, the guy who ordered these copper ingots and didn't get what he ordered, and it was
Really?
crappy quality. And so he's got we have in a museum somewhere this tablet that says, "Hey, you didn't give me what I ordered, you bastard."
Oh
And
man.
it's more. I think it's more than 2,000 years old.
That's so funny. It's funny how what really probably drove us to really adopt communication was things about money, I mean, resources was probably a big thing that drove written written language.
Yeah, to have records and to be able to coordinate large systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As an aside, I actually was interested in understanding the origins of written language, and historians believe that it's originated 40,000 years ago, and that the current theory is that it was to help hunters understand cycles of prey. So they'd write they'd make symbols to be oh, when moon is up, this animal comes out.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so it would have been sort of a shorthand, or I mean, I guess it is all symbology, but I guess that makes sense. It would be symbols that of cause and effect. That's really cool.
Yeah, right.
I hadn't heard that. I love that.
And so it's cool to see how technology has gone from that to now we have our phones, where a lot, like, how much of your day-to-day communications do you think is like in person and synchronous conversations versus these asynchronous like messages?
Well, would you include synchronous like video communication or like what
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
doing right now? What's
I'd consider this to be synchronous.
okay? Um, I think most of my communication is synchronous. I don't, like I said, I'm not very good at. Well, I guess implied by what I said and true is I'm not very good at texting. I think I used to be, and honestly, I'm not sure what stopped it. It might have been the whole feeling like I was coming on too strong, especially with dating. Like, needing to, uh, if I said something stupid, needing to add another message to undo it, when really what you should do is let people assume that people will give you the benefit of the doubt and act like a normal person.
Yeah.
And, there's a feeling that everybody, like, of course, um, I'm going to give people grace and let people off the hook. It doesn't bother me that much, but other people, I'm assuming I'm a huge bother, and so this is how it feels. And so I don't text as much as I used to. Uh, so I think mostly synchronous. I also live with people both here and in Seattle, and I think that helps. I try and get out and talk to people in the park sometimes.
Yeah.
I have a whiteboard that I uh, put. I've only done it a couple times, so like I put questions on to
Yeah.
invite people to chat,
Oh,
and I
that's
don't
such a
record
cool
them or anything.
idea. Oh,
Yeah,
I love that. That's a great way to
yeah.
connect with people.
I think what I'm gonna do next with it is just put "Can I pet your dog?" and just have that there, and then if somebody wants to come by, I'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
yeah.
most dog owners are usually happy to let people pet their dogs.
Yeah, it probably uh, like getting a dog is probably a debuff to your social battery in some ways because it just gets taxed so much more because people are gonna always be coming up to you and saying, "Hey, can I pet your dog?"
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Um, yeah, you kind of have to accept that that's going to happen.
Yeah. What about you? Do you think that you communicate more synchronously or asynchronously?
I think it depends, right? Because I live alone and I'm like in a lot of different, and I'm in a few different text groups. So on a normal weekday, I'd say like probably over 50% of my conversations are through text. So send a message and I wait, but like I don't even wait necessarily. I go to do something else versus like something like this where I'm talking to someone in person or on the phone. When I'm having like a conversation like in real time with someone, I feel more present. I'm not focused on other things. I don't like have like I'm not playing a like sometimes I'll be you're talking while you're playing a game, but like you're still focused on the conversation versus like when I'll text, put down the phone, kind of forget the context, do a bunch of other things, maybe cook lunch and then get back to it.
Yeah, but I think so that lets us multitask quite a bit. It
Yeah.
lets us do a bunch of different things. I suppose that your contention might be that we're not good at multitasking. Or
I guess I hadn't really gotten to like a, a contention or a point to
sure.
this. But it's more of an observation that technology has been meant to like we've developed these technologies to help our forms of communication in this way, like be able to reach out to more people, be able to reach out across the world no matter where you are, when you are, which is great. But there are some unintended consequences, and maybe now it's having more of an influence on the way we communicate, where now like text and like yeah is becoming a much more common form of communication than like just having conversations in person. So it's just like an observation how like we governed technology and now the technology is kind of starting to govern us.
Starting to,
Well,
or
not starting to, but in many ways, in many aspects, it has shaped us.
Oh, I think it's been shaping us uh, ever since we started developing technology. Any technology, because the technology is
Yeah, that's
basically
true.
an adaptation,
Yeah.
right? It's not a genetic and it's not a genetically derived adaptation, but it is an adaptation that it's an extension of ourselves. Like if you get in a
Yeah.
car, uh, or you're using a fork, right? You're there's a you're feeling at the end of the fork, right? You can feel the plate. You have a sense. Your proprioception has a sense of the fork, even though it's not connected to you. It's a
Hmm.
tool that you're using, and then it becomes a part of you effectively, uh, in insofar as you are using it as an extension of your limb.
Yeah, it's true. But from my own personal experiences, I've noticed that of the times where I use my hands to eat directly, where I touch the food versus using a knife and fork, I feel like when my hands are involved, when I get that extra sense of the food itself, it feels like a different experience. It feels like I like understand the food a bit differently.
Are there any foods that you sometimes eat with your hands and sometimes eat with utensils?
Yeah, like a big one would be meat, especially like meat with bones on it, right? So I grew up in a culture where you
Yeah.
like grab the meat by the bone and you like chomp down. So it becomes like a
Okay.
much messier experience. It's like much more like feeling. So like I can feel the temperature, the texture with my hands as well as my lips, and I feel like my hands have like a better understanding of texture than like my mouth. So that's like a helpful way for
Okay.
me to feel and understand the food. Versus if I
Interesting.
use a knife and fork to cut off a piece of steak and put that in my mouth, like I gave myself a manageable bite, but like I didn't bite into it. I didn't feel it against my lips, like in that
Hmm.
way.
The way you're describing it feels sort of primal.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess there's no value judgment on saying something is primal, but I think one is kind of default implied, like a negative. Well, I suppose it can be negative in some contexts and positive in others.
I think it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
I mean, and even the
But,
Europeans, like they changed their opinions on like silverware
mhm.
in like I mean, within the last 500 years, but still, like I remember seeing a quote from it was like a Dutch prince, one of the Muslim empires, like they sent a delegation over there, said the king, and they were like, oh, you're like, why are you using forks and knives to eat your food? Like God gave us these tools to eat our food with us.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but of course, God gave us the means to create other tools. But no, that is fun. That is like, look, it's
But you're
perfect.
right.
It works fine.
But you're absolutely right. We like the tools we've created, the technology we've created is a an extension of ourselves in a way.
I thought you were going to go for, or I don't know what I thought you were going to go for, but the thing that occurs to me after that
Are you
is
trying to
from
predict me?
God.
Do you have like
I
Chat
Well,
GPT
look,
up
isn't
to
it?
like
That's what communication. That's part of what communication is, right? We have models of other people in our heads,
Mhm.
and well, not just communication, but social engagement. Hunting, even when you're hunting prey, you're trying to figure out what it's going to do, or if you're a prey animal, then you might be trying to figure out what the predator is going to do. And I
Yeah.
think we're very good at it. Uh, Not all animals are as good at it, and that's why we're the best, or at least the most advanced. But no, the thing I was going to say uh, was that if God, or not God, if God in a system where God exists, um, the not only does God give us the ability to make tools, but we don't. He doesn't necessarily give us the discernment as to which tools ought to be made.
Mhm.
Like, is this communication, the all this texting, is this good for us? Is it bad for us? Is TikTok good for us or bad for us?
Yeah.
You know, um, it's we're not very good at deciding, certainly not on a civilization or society level, uh, in an effective way at least, which things are good for us and which are not.
Yeah. So that's a yeah. So with all of the information we have available to us, it's like it becomes even more complicated to know to figure out what is actually good for us.
Yeah, and figuring out what are the things that we're going to prioritize is kind of a decision.
Yeah.
We don't. There is no fundamental. This is good. This is bad. Everything just has qualities in the ways that it interacts with the rest of the world, and whether something is good or bad depends upon the value system that we arrive at.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and a lot of people like decide their value system through like religion, and that's fine. Some people like come
Sure.
up with their own value system, and that's fine. But yeah, as long as it's a part of a value system that you have adopted fully within yourself.
But it's more granular than religion. Like religion provides you a basis, but there's a whole bunch of, I guess, intersecting ways that you can value something. Uh, Within, like, you could have two Jews, let's say, I myself being Jewish. You could have one person who decides that the thing they value more is scholarship, and one person who decides the thing they value more is good acts.
Hmm.
And they may both value both of them, but the way that those things are in balance with each other can inform the way that you're going to live your life and
Yeah.
make day-to-day decisions.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I mean, I guess even going back to our last conversation on social contracts and how and societies, that's kind of like how basically describing societies. We have a bunch of individual people with individual value systems, but you create there is some sort of social fabric that gets us all to live harmoniously, where we have the ability to meet our value systems,
to meet them. Do
to
you mean
to
have them interact?
fulfill them, to
Oh yeah,
yeah.
uh, yeah. I think, yeah, society is a way of us figuring out how to live together in a way that gets us that makes us less angry at each other, so we doesn't fall apart. It's
Hopefully less angry at
hopefully,
each other.
yeah. Yeah. Before we move on to something,
Yeah.
I did realize that, as far as communication, I think I am actually doing a whole bunch of asynchronous consumption all the time. Like, reading things other people have written.
Yeah.
Um, just like I read articles and stories. I guess I watch too much YouTube, and that's asynchronous communication. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
if I were to include that, then way more than 50% is
I guess
asynchronous.
I wasn't considering that as part of
Okay.
the communication. So that's okay, but a
Yeah, fair
good
enough.
thing to note.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the tremendous amount of data we have available to us, es- I feel like so. I've been seeing this trend. I mean, this trend has been going on for a while of trying to really get down to the quantitative information about our bodies.
Hmm.
Like understanding, like in some cases, yeah, it matters. Like if you have diabetes and need to monitor your blood glucose level, like that matters a lot and can really do wonders in helping your how you live with it. So things like that, yeah, I'm highly supportive of. That's fantastic. But then there's things like people are trying to optimize their bodies. Like I have a couple friends who really are interested in optimizing their bodies. Like either if it's counting all of the macronutrients they try to consume and trying to understand their caloric intake and output in quantitative means, or trying to understand ideal heart rates that they should be achieving at various points, or sleep even, okay, this is the perfect time for me to sleep, this is when I should wake up. So do you have do you have any thoughts around some of these datazations?
I mean, well, so on the super optimization point, everything is going to be diminished. Like eventually, it gets to a point where you're over optimizing and diminishing returns, right?
Yeah.
You are uh, getting too much. You're focusing too much on something that isn't going to give that much more benefit. Um, I think, as far as like the data we collect on ourselves, I think that part of it is maybe it's an overextension of curiosity,
Hmm.
where we want to know all these things, and we have more and more tools to give us access. And sometimes a lot of times we collect data, especially in tech, big tech with like ads, not ads. I'm sorry, apps. Um, we're collecting data. We're not necessarily sure what we're going to do with it.
Hmm.
One of the principles at the team at Google that I worked on, and I presumably all of Google, was that you should know, like you shouldn't collect data just in case, right? You should be collecting data for a specific purpose, for a specific, like if you're adding metrics in to say that somebody clicks this button, that has to there has to be a reason for that.
Hmm.
That okay, a button press is actually pretty standard because that would tell you that they're interacting with the system in this way. They're using that path, and that's very useful to know. But maybe the amount of time they spend on one screen may not always be relevant.
Yeah.
Certainly, where they are
Or
when they're
like
using the
how far
app,
they scrolled down the web page or whatever.
those are also a lot of these things. To be honest, you can find lots of ways, lots of reasons to collect these data,
Yeah.
and they do help you develop things. But I do sometimes we collect things that uh, that we're not necessarily balancing the equation of should I collect it versus reasons I shouldn't collect it, harms done or potential harms done by it that uh, not everybody would agree on. Not everybody that's involved, the user included or especially, they
Hmm.
might not agree.
Yeah, I think yeah, there's like there's we in Amazon like they didn't care. They're like just whatever, collect all of it. Who cares?
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a respect that data that we need to show to this data. Like yeah, we can collect data on anything we want in this day and age. But data on itself doesn't necessarily mean anything. In fact, I'd argue like the raw data in itself doesn't mean anything until we have like a narrative to bind it to something. Like usually there's some kind of reason there's a reason behind that data.
Do you mean like I mean words don't mean anything unless they're given meaning? They're like do you mean like in the same way that symbols don't have value or meaning unless there's something behind them?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I mean the data. Yeah, we say the data tells the story, but the data describes something, right? Um, I mean, I guess you're right. Raw data that isn't connected to anything that you don't have any context on.
You
Well, then
can
it's just a code, actually.
like the same data can be used to tell multitudes of stories.
Mm-hmm.
We can use like we often use correlations among data to suggest that like oh this is what something broke here because these
Yeah.
data points correlated with this outage or whatever.
But the stories, you can have different stories that you can tell multiple stories with the same data, but in part, that might just be reflective of the fact that there are so many stories to be told
Hmm.
with, like, I walk through the street and everybody I'm interacting with has their own story
Yeah.
that is continuing, and I'm a minor part or a major part or just, you know, not even there. And you can use the data that I provide to help tell all those other stories. That doesn't mean that the that the that the data that my contribution to it is itself meaningless, except when applied to those stories.
Um Well, I guess what so besides like you so you find the data meaningful because it's something you're generating,
Okay.
right? Your being there is meaningful to you.
Okay. Um, I guess could you restate your point?
Yeah, so the the danger of just collecting data and
Mhm.
this has like a real like can have personal toll too. Like if you start like measuring your heart rate, measuring your sleep schedule, doing all these measurements, you can generate a lot of different stories. You can generate a story that says I am in a perfect healthy situation. All these numbers, they all suggest in the aggregate that I'm fine. Or you could say, uh-oh, I had a blip in my heart rate. It went up for some reason. I don't know why. Like, what does that mean? Is something wrong with me? Do I need to do further diagnostics?
So I think uh, what this brings to mind for me is Talmudic and biblical commentary, where
Oh,
there's something
please
that,
do share the
yeah.
difference.
So in the Talmud and in the Bible, um, at least the way I grew up studying it, there is the text that is the basis that we call the thing itself, right? The Bible or the Talmud. There's the text of it, and then surrounding that, literally, and especially in the Talmud, where the text is the text of the Talmud, the Gemara itself, is sort of centered on the
Mm.
page, taking up a certain amount of it, depending on how much commentary there is. And the commentary takes up the rest of the page.
Oh, that's
So there are
cool.
some pages
Huh.
that are like hugely, almost entirely base text because there just wasn't very much that was interesting to say there.
Yeah.
And there are some pages that are just one or two lines of base text and then so much commentary about it.
Yeah.
Um, and what this is making me think is that the data itself, it's not a question of the so much of the data itself existing and being collected. It's when we consult it and tell our stories about it. So you
Yeah.
could collect all that heart data and then not look at it yourself or have a medical app analyze it and tell you what you actually need to know instead of involving yourself in all of these things that are going to make you feel worse about it. For the specific example of thinking about all this heart data is going to, you know, end up giving me worse health.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think the consultation and the maybe choosing which stories we incorporate which data into is important, and not just should we be collecting it at all, or like discernment in what is this appropriate for, what does this data, what should I be using this data for, and where should I just kind of ignore it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the like really paying more attention of the story that we are looking for is an important one because ultimately people have usually we have some kind of narrative or some kind of bias that we're going into when we're observing things. Like maybe when I'm looking at my heart rate, I'm actually like kind of I have anxiety because I had a recent issue with something in my life, or like I was worried that I'm not eating right, so like I'm more worried that like maybe I'm messing with my heart. Or in the case of like in like a in like tech or whatever, in former teams, we'd be like, oh, well, we need to look for this data because something seemed to be wrong. So like we need data to confirm that something went wrong. So like now I'm hunting for an answer, but I already know the story I'm going to tell with it.
But your story might be wrong, or it
True.
might be different than what you think it is,
But if you
and so
don't
this.
recognize what the story is, then you might just assume you might see that data and say, "Uh-oh, like my heart is in trouble." Or
Mm.
otherwise, if you know like, okay, wait, I know I've had like a stressful week. I know like I've been looking at this heart data for way too long, and so maybe when I look at the data, I see some blips. But I look at the, I'm like, okay, wait, let's not make conclusions. Let me look at a broader time horizon. I'm like, okay, so this is normal.
Maybe part of the problem is assuming that. the story that fits is the story that's true, instead of, because there are going to be lots of stories that fit any given piece of data, uh, and
Oh yeah, tons.
some of them aren't going to be real. Some of
Th-
them are not going to. Some of
There are
them aren't going to
classic
be recognition.
examples of correlations that are actually very strong correlations, but don't make any sense. But
Hmm.
you could make narratives around it.
Hmm.
One that I remember is like there was a correlation on the price of lemons to global piracy. And it was a
Okay.
very strong correlation, but it wasn't that. Oh no, it was international terrorism. It was price of lemons and international terrorism. But I think
Okay.
you'd be hard. It would be a weird story to tell that like, oh, the lemons are getting too expensive. That's why we've had more terrorism.
Yeah. And a similar one would be Pastafarianism, the worship of the flying spaghetti monster, where uh, the one of their core tenets is that as there have been fewer pirates, there has been more climate change.
Yeah.
So we need to bring back more pirates.
Yeah. So, and obviously, we look at these narratives and we say that's obviously like ridiculous. But if you were looking for these data specifically, you'd say, oh, there's clearly, look at this. This is a very strong correlation. Like
Mm.
you'd be like hard pressed to find equally strong correlations when you're trying to find data that fits the same story.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, because you're collecting it at, I don't know if you're collecting it at the wrong spot, because farther down there's something that is that is a causation, right?
Right.
That is causing both of those data to show up in that way. So there is a causation, not always, but in that example, presumably there is a causative relationship. It's just not directly between those elements.
Yeah, yeah, and like having that broader context does matter a lot, but oftentimes we don't look for that context.
Right.
That takes
Yeah.
time to look for, or even to understand that you should be like examining it, stepping back.
Mhm. Is then part of the well, here I am looking for solutions. Maybe part of the solution is greater data literacy, right? Or maybe that exposes, let's say it this way, maybe that exposes our data illiteracy in general, the way that we think about data and the way that we process information doesn't match very well with all of this new data that we're being uh, uh, bombarded with.
Yeah, and well, how do you think we can? Like, what do you think would be key for data literacy? Like, where do you think are the main things that we're lacking in?
So this is something I think. This part is something I think about a lot. So it's my part. The catch-all that I'll provide or apply to this is we should be less certain of things.
I
I
agree.
think I think that um, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. You can never know anything for sure, and I do mean anything. Like I try to think that, for example, even the scientific method, right? The very thing that is helping me to understand uh, the world, it might not it might not be optimal, or maybe it's just wrong. I think it's probably not wrong, but I think I need to be open to the possibility within the universe of that being the case, so that I can adapt where I need to. Like I'm not living my life as though the scientific method is wrong, but
It's very
uh,
helpful for the things that it has helped like elucidate, right? Like
right,
it may
right. But
not
any
it may not solve all problems, but it does solve very
right,
specific and broad problems.
yeah. But any model is going to be presumed. It should be presumed that it is not perfect or may not be perfect. The model is not the territory. I don't remember who said that, or the map is not the territory. The thing that you're using to represent reality, and data is one of those things. A map is data about the world, um, and where things are in it. The map is not the same as the thing itself. And
Yeah.
so you've got a map, you can make assumptions based on it, you can make guesses based on it, but you can't be certain, except insofar as certainty is a state of feeling rather than a state of actual knowledge.
Yeah. And I think, and we've seen historically that, oftentimes our maps have been wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes there have been hidden biases behind the maps. Even a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the maps of the world that most people are familiar with, at least in the West, are inaccurate. Like it has fundamental inaccuracies in it. Like the size of
Well,
continents are like pretty misconstrued.
well, that's true, but that's not a mistake. That's a choice as to what you're going to represent properly.
But it's
My
still
understanding,
that's still a hidden bias that, because people aren't aware of it, does lead to like some unfortunate assumptions. Like
sure,
many people don't realize how large and how large and diverse Africa is, for instance.
yeah, and on the map it looks like it's the same size as Greenland. And Greenland is much smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've heard that one too. Um, yeah, I think that being more aware of those, the way that maybe being more aware of the way that the map departs from accurately depicting the territory, like to
Hmm.
know which trade-offs are being made. Like one of those maps, I don't remember which one, or some of those maps are made so that any angle on the map matches up to the angle you'd make at that point in the world.
Mm.
So like you face this heading, and uh, it helps you make sure you're going the right way, but it doesn't represent the size of the continents properly.
Yeah.
Other ones are like, yeah, I want to make sure that the distances are going to be, uh, I guess the distance between any 2 points is going to be equal. Um, I don't know if that actually doesn't make sense because of flat. I don't know. I'm not an expert on maps.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I'm not either, but the point is that like there's a there is a danger in accepting like something like a map or any kind of data as the fundamental truth without understanding like the biases that went into it. I mean, from we know from like classic quantum mechanics experiments that we found that the fact of observing something can change
hmm.
that thing.
I don't. I think my understanding of that is not so much that it's the fact that you're observing it; it's the fact that you're able to. The fact that like photons are coming to
Yeah.
you.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's the aspect of it.
at least that part. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, these things are uncertain, uh,
Yeah. We live in an
and
uncertain world.
yeah, and yet we have so much certainty. Or maybe there's we expect that we ought to be able to have certainty, and we live as though it is possible and our right, maybe, to be certain, uh,
I think it makes
and
things a
it
lot.
can't be.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, no, I finished, and it can't be. We
Yeah.
can't be certain.
Yeah. I Yeah, you're definitely right, but I feel like it's easier for us, like for our minds, to compute the world, to understand things as being certain. Because if
Hmm.
it's certain, I don't need to like my mind doesn't have to think about it. I don't have to spend that complex computational processing power to think about like whether or not the my apartment is going to like implode on me or right. Like I don't need
Yeah.
to do that. It's something that I'm going to assume. I don't need to assume like I don't like assume that I'm going to have a surprise medical emergency because I'm in perfect health, and that's what my mind assumes as the its mental mapping of the body that like okay, things are good and things are probably going to be good forever.
I think it's also that you don't have to propagate the uncertainty throughout the equation. You don't
Mm,
have to preserve. Okay, this was uncertain, and therefore this has this compounding level of uncertainty because
yeah.
this is only true if this is true, and that might not be true, and so this has some partial truth value to it. and that's super complicated.
Yeah, that's a
But I
lot of
think that
math. I remember
yeah,
doing that in like first year physics.
uh yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to be thinking about. But
Yeah.
I think that not to say that we ought to be doing this because again, very difficult and not necessarily practical. But we should. One of the things I want to put in my AI system, uh, if I create it, is uh, the the way that different truths rely on each other or different beliefs rely on each other,
Yes.
because we're not very good at recomputing our beliefs. The example that is most that I use when I stopped being religious, and I may have said this on here before, I'm not sure. When I stopped being religious, it took me like 6 months to realize that I no longer expected the world to end in the next 200 years. Like, in Judaism, as in much of Christianity, the world is only some 6,000 years old, not
Hmm.
quite 6,000. In the Jewish calendar, it's around 58, 90, or something like that.
Yeah.
So I expected, oh, I only have to make, oh, and the world's supposed to end, like the Messiah is supposed to come either when we deserve it, or if we don't deserve it, then to save us from ourselves at the end of 6,000 years. So I expected, oh, I just have to find a way to stick around, even though no one ever has, until the Messiah comes or until the world ends in 200 years. And then, you know, I don't know, I'll live forever or something. But the thing that I hadn't recomputed was I no longer expected the Messiah to come because I no longer believed in God.
Mm.
And yet I still expected the world to end uh, in about 200 years until I realized that I thought that. And that the
Yeah.
reason that I thought that was because it was suspended on all this stuff about the religion. So you don't really notice what you have. I think we have a lot of things stored in our heads as here's the thing I believe, here's the thing I believe, but I don't consciously uh, relate it to the things that it's based on. So I believe this because I believe this, but if I change this belief, I don't always recompute this one. I'll keep
Yeah.
operating as though this is true, even though because this thing isn't true, this thing can't be true either.
Yeah, and it's something that you didn't even notice
Yeah.
initially when you made the break from religion, because like your mind wasn't like, okay, well now we have to redo all these value systems and beliefs. It's like, no, it's fine. We'll just figure out how to make this belief still work out.
Yeah, I think or we don't know that we have to. I think.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's it too. Because like, what makes someone question a belief?
Right. What does make someone question a belief? Well, I think, let's see. Well, why would you stop believing something? That's the same question as you just asked.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
basically.
because what it's founded on doesn't work, or because it doesn't seem to work in the world. Like, so either it's like I test it, it doesn't seem to work, or the chain of reasoning that led me to believe it somehow falls down. And I think we
Yeah.
probably, maybe we often don't recompute things on the basis of uh, them, that their support no longer working out often until we notice that they no longer apply to the world correctly. They don't predict the way the world is operating accurately.
Yeah, that could be it. That could at least be one aspect of it. I can also see like direct challenges or direct questions from others
Hmm.
who are like, hey, this is like who express their beliefs, and
Hmm.
like that's an opportunity for either you to clash and like defend yours, or to maybe adopt and morph yours to be
Hmm.
more consistent.
Hmm.
Like, but maybe we have different belief, like hold different beliefs in a different level of strength, right? Like my
Hmm.
my belief about how the world works, which is fundamentally like at its core a belief. It's not something that I've like really like done conscious thoughts into, but it's like how I understand things are. And like you said, like that's kind of how what we do in social interactions. We have a mental mapping of how the other people are going to react, and that's basically just these little mental models. But for me, those are very like malleable and very malleable beliefs, because I'm willing to accept that I'm wrong and that I don't have all of the information. So I'm happy to like mold it as I learn more and more.
I used to worry. So I think very similarly about the way that certainly the way I try to interact with the world. I used to worry that I was too malleable because it seemed that the last person I talked to, it felt like they had the biggest change on my opinion, the biggest input to that. And I can't say that that's incorrect, but it's also possible that they were all changing my opinion because I was considering and testing my beliefs or trying to. And so my beliefs would change. And because of recency bias, I'd be like, oh, that one must have done it the most.
Yeah.
Although also because of recency bias, it might have been that one did have the most impact.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I used to worry about that I didn't have the strength of my convictions. And to be fair, I do still worry about that because if you're so malleable, then how can you commit yourself to a course of action? And that's something I worry about with respect to myself.
That's a great question, and maybe it's something that's something I've thought about too. Like, am I like too ready to change my beliefs? Should I hold onto them more strongly? And I think what works for me, and it's like a lot of just feeling, right? Like a lot of my beliefs aren't important to who I am in my core. Like I have core values, which are ultimately a belief system, and those I'm willing to like fight for, because those have the most to do with who I am.
That's true. I think the thing that's difficult is a lot of times beliefs can become, let's say, allied, so that you start to equate one belief with another. And defending the one belief. Let's say, what's an example? Let's say that there were a belief that was considered synonymous with a religion. Let's say pigs are unhealthy for kosher, right? If it turns out, now it happened, I say that because, I think there's a bacteria trichinosis that is present in uncooked pig. And if it's not properly cooked, it is harmful.
Yeah.
But the idea that it is fundamentally harmful to you in some way to consume pig, then you find out that pig, if that is your contention, if that is your belief, and it is bound up with the rest of the system, then if you find a challenge to that, then you might double down. You might fail to change your belief so that, oh no, that actually probably isn't the reason that we're not allowed to eat pig. There's something else, or maybe it was that, and maybe it was just because we didn't know about bacteria back then. I think maybe this isn't a very good example, but I think there definitely are times when you feel something so strongly that it becomes it feels like it becomes part of or analogous to a different part of the identity, and you forget to decouple it when you find out that this belief may no longer be true. I need a better example, but I think
You know what? I feel like I've had beliefs like that in the past. Maybe beliefs that like were a bit more on the contentious side, and I held on too strongly for some reason. I don't know. And well, actually, yeah, I can talk about like my relationship with religion too. Like I grew up Christian in our Armenian household where I was taught that my religion was tied to my identity as an Armenian, and that like it was constantly reinforced that like there are no, like every Armenian is Christianity and being Armenian go hand in hand. So when I went to college, and like, you know, a lot of people like love to debate religion at that point because a lot of people got out of very Christian households, and I was, you know, one of the few like still believers in like in engineering, and I'd have like these, would want to find some kind of evidence, because like I was finding that like, you know, I was getting more counter evidence that was disproving my worldview in a way that like was shaking me to my core, and like I was getting very like unnerved by it, like very strained by it. I was looking for some kind of data to prove me right, to prove that my beliefs were right. And it took a long time for me to finally decouple that even the identity of Christianity, the link between Christianity and my nationality or my ethnicity, that was a difficult one to sever, because it required me to like kind of go back and be like, okay, this linkage that was reinforced in my mind is itself a belief, and that belief isn't actually accurate.
So when you encountered these challenges to your religious beliefs, that felt like an attack on the core of who you were, even as an Armenian?
Yeah, kind of. And like maybe that's not how I like conceptualized it in my head, but it was to the point where like I would get really frustrated by these debates, and I would get like I would I'd be like spending hours looking for some kind of evidence that was that would satisfy my like my other understandings of the world via the more scientific method perspective.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that that sounds like uh, an adaptive, an adaptation for religion to be able to tap into those other ideas and say, "Hey, this is part of this other thing that is separate, but so that it makes it stronger to ally with other ideas to say,
Yeah.
oh yeah, you got to hold on to this one because if you don't, what's going to happen to this one?
Yeah, and I think that's because religion has a lot. There's a lot
Very
to
core to
religion.
you alone.
Like there's the belief system itself. There's philosophies. There's community. There's identity. Like there's so much that like that's why I think like it's kind of unfair to force religion on children, because as you're developing your identity, it can be very like confusing to have all of these very complex notions be put on you.
Like the formation of any person is, I mean, you get to choose the environment in which you create your child, right? It's different. Like that sounds. I mean, what about the belief that the child is American, right? And uh, therefore, there are all these values associated with America,
Well,
and
but
you say to your child, "This is what America means,"
yeah.
right? And you don't say, "This is what America means to me," and you should decide what you want. We say, "This is what America means to us," often, that feels. Uh, I think the difficulty is that religion is something that, like, I don't want my kids to be religious. I'm guessing you might not.
I don't
And
I personally don't
uh,
mind if they would become religious if I had
I don't want
kids.
them to grow up religious
Oh,
per
sure.
se.
I mean, I wouldn't impose a religion on anybody, let alone children.
But if you believed that religion to be good and true, like if you are, I try to teach the kids I live with, um, you know, principles relating to the scientific method and trying to figure things out,
Yeah.
because I think that that is the a maybe not the but certainly part of the best way of approaching the world. And I'm presenting them, I'm trying to steep them in my belief system because I believe that it is better, or I believe it's good. And anybody who is bringing their kids up in religion is doing the same thing. They earnestly believe that this system is good. Maybe not everybody, but most, like generally, they earnestly believe the system is good and good for the people that are in it. And the right thing for you to do in that situation is to expose your child to that system that you earnestly believe to be good. It's just that we disagree, at a society level, on what is good, and we also don't agree that we often don't agree that we can have those disagreements, and the fact that we disagree doesn't make any of us evil.
Yeah. And I guess, but I can understand why some people would be resistant to those disagreements, because if you see your belief system as being like a fundamental, like a priori, like the most good, like absolute truth good, and like things outside of that as at least less good, then I can see why you'd be very resistant to have like discussions that could lead in those disagreements. It'd be akin to a battle of good and evil.
Yeah, and you can't be sure that good is going to win. It may just be that the convincing argument wins.
Yeah.
I think there's a thing I've heard of religious folks, like advice given to religious folks by religious folks. You can be friends with people who aren't religious. Just make sure they don't influence you. And what do friends do? One of the things friends do is influence each other.
Yeah.
By being people around other people and interacting.
And they shape us, like you said. Like we're not the only ones who are malleable. I think we all are malleable. Like and I think but it takes self-awareness to understand, like, hey, some of my beliefs actually changed because of this person. And like there's nothing wrong with that. Like if we were all super rigid and did not change for anybody, like society wouldn't function, because like we said in the beginning, if you have people with different value systems and they're not able to like really influence each other, like to make like shared value systems, then why would they ever like work together?
Well, you can't have certain societies, right? Certain
True.
types of, like a multicultural society. But if you're okay having a monocultural society, then that could work great. Get rid of all the dissent, get rid of all the influences that could lead somebody astray from the one true path, and you've got the society that you dream of, if that's what you dream of.
Yeah.
Or if that is an okay dream to you.
We've had several of those, like Jonestown.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking about cults.
Yeah, I'm talking about cults.
but you could even have, like, on a society level, like if you think about any of the censorship that people are trying, not much of the censorship, like the censorship of depictions of LGBT folks, to try and erase them so that you don't think that this is normal. Because if you see depictions of somebody, then you can tell, then you're more used to that story existing.
Yeah.
And then when you see that story embodied in a real person, you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I've heard stories like this before.
Yeah, because it shapes your worldview.
Right. And like the idea that all communists are evil and want to, destroy your freedom is another brainwashy belief. The idea that all capitalists are evil and want to destroy your life is also not true. These beliefs, I lost my train.
So like, yeah, these beliefs can be pernicious when we start to, maybe they can get pernicious when we start to like hold on to them too strongly and don't give ourselves the room to make them more malleable, to like make them maybe more consistent with how the society, how like other people experience the world, or how a more nuanced view of like a world view. It's like going back to the maps, right? You can have like, you can draw out a map of the world. You can like use an old map of the world. You can use a new map of the world. You can use a globe. You can use like the most advanced like geo-imaging technology. These are different ways of understanding with various levels of nuance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think the beliefs are like, I wonder whether I'd like to conceptualize belief as like a thing that's there, and then I point to one and then I say, okay, that's my belief. Or if the belief is like the pointer that I have, or like I'm changing the thing itself, right? Like I changed my belief, or I now have a different belief.
Do you have like an example? That'd be a good one to describe this.
Let's see. You can cut dead space if you decide to.
I mean, so I actually did a lot of thinking in the several months ago about beliefs and like what are beliefs, because I've been intentionally trying to change some of the beliefs I've held, specifically of certainty. And I have a little blurb in my philosophy journal about certainty that I can read. It's not too, yeah. I am only certain of uncertainty. I live in an uncertain world, and even within myself face uncertain variables constantly. Will I wake up healthy? Will I have a weird headspace? Will my fancy pen run out of ink mid-sentence? Which I have a note. It did happen while I was writing this.
This one.
A bit meta there. Is uncertainty just a feature of life? No. Uncertainty is life itself. We would not even be able to have these questions without uncertainty being core to reality. To ignore uncertainty is to deny life, to bind us to mental and maybe physical anguish, and to close ourselves from happiness. Uncertainty exists and is omnipresent. Choose to embrace it. Choose to go with the flow. The less you fight the chaos, the better your chances of choosing your happiness and of being your authentic self.
Can you repeat that last line?
Yeah. The
unfortunately,
we had a little sound, little sirens. I'll just read the last little paragraph. Uncertainty exists and is omnipresent. Choose to embrace it. The less you fight the chaos, the better your chances of choosing your happiness, of being your authentic self.
The world itself is not uncertain. It's the way that we conceive of it, right? The world is, however it is. We just have difficulty figuring out what.
Well, but the world is dynamic, but yes, ultimately, you are right. If the world is just how we interpret and how we observe the world, how we experience the world, is what is actually uncertain.
But you're right too. The dynamicity, the dynamic nature of the world is one of the things that makes it impossible to be certain, because part of certainty is the way things are, and if those change, and we're not very good at remembering that things can change, like with the beliefs we talked about earlier, then we're not going to operate very well in that.
Yeah. And COVID is an excellent example of this, and is actually when I started really thinking about uncertainty, because I just saw how this global pandemic that came out of nowhere, and if you were looking at any data normally, you'd say 2020 is going to be a totally normal year. Nothing exciting going to happen. Whatever. Maybe a presidential election. But because the whole world like changed, how we viewed the world completely changed. I found it interesting how some people, it just kind of broke them. Their beliefs were so like unmovable and unchangeable that they just instead resisted and just tried to say like, no, this isn't real. This isn't happening. This is something else. It's a conspiracy, or it's all made up, or it's both a conspiracy and all made up and all real.
Yeah. Conspiracy thinking is difficult to understand, or can be.
Yeah. So that was like, for me, like a crash course in seeing like, oh, wait, I guess the things I assumed of the world, that like everything seemed fine up for all of my life up until that point, and boom, rare event, suddenly you're like, okay, well, maybe this certainty thing isn't really that certain.
Yeah. You're talking about like the certainty of the sun rising in the east tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? The certainty I thought you were going for here, again, with me predicting what you were going to say, I thought you were going to talk about the certainty of like medical communicators, and that here is the way that things are. Here's how the virus is, and the failure of medical communicators and policy communicators to say, here's what we think, here's how we think it operates, that our understanding of it might change. And then also, it might change, like the reality might change. So actually, that's actually an interesting concrete example of the difference between the world changing and our understanding of it changing. Because in that one thing, in the virus and in the disease, it is our understanding is dynamic, both because we're going to learn more things, we're going to make assumptions that are wrong, and maybe later we'll correct them, and the underlying fact is changing, and we don't know which fact we're dealing with because there are different strains of the virus.
Yeah.
So there's all these different things that are changing, and certainty in any of it can be damaging. Because you can be, why did they say, they said something different yesterday, now they're saying something new. You can't trust them. They never know, and they always talk like they know.
And that's a big reason why people didn't want to adopt, like people still don't want to adopt masks, or like we're so hesitant against the vaccines, because people were saying, like you were saying, all these medical communicators were saying very certain, very strong messages without leaving the room for like, hey, this is a new virus. This is the current recommendation, but this could change. We don't know.
Yeah, because I think with the mask thing, it was like early on, a policy, like politicians and people in administrative positions have an interest in not scaring people.
Yeah.
And, telling them, no, it's okay. Masks aren't going to help. And they miscommunicated that because they wanted to preserve masks for medical professionals. But I guess maybe it also makes it seem like less of a problem, right? You're going to feel more calm if masks aren't really going to do anything. They're not going to help. They're not going to hurt. Then it doesn't feel as big a thing. Although I want to walk all that back, because it really, the main reason was that they wanted to preserve it for medical professionals, at least as far as I remember.
Yeah, that's as far as I know too.
Yeah. And
it makes sense because this was early pandemic, like April 2020, when we did not have nearly enough masks. Like, the manufacturers had not pumped out enough yet. We were out of toilet paper.
Yeah. We were out of toilet paper because of everybody buying it, right?
Yeah.
Like we weren't going through more toilet paper all of a sudden. We were just buying it. I've lost my train.
Well, since we're we're coming to a good closing point here, I wanted to kind of wrap it back up to like some of the data discussions we were having earlier, that, when you're going back to the example of like optimizing yourself and like looking at your, like, let's say you're looking at your heart rate and your calories and like all these, like you're collecting quantitative data on all this stuff about you, it's important to leave that room for uncertainty, saying like, hey, like this is what I'm seeing, but it's also like maybe there's more to it than I understand, and my body is a whole complete system, so it's more complicated than maybe just one reading on one part of my system. And you shouldn't discount some of your own experiences. Like I don't use any apps to collect data on my body, but I will listen to like my gut a lot. Like sometimes if I'll eat something and be like, oh, I feel like kind of bloated after that, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to avoid eating that thing.
Mm-hmm. Because we're always collecting data on the world.
Yeah.
Right. It's just which data do we trust, and which ones are we elevating into our decision making, consciously or unconsciously. And I guess like with the heart thing, you're elevating something unconsciously into your decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there ways to address that are, I guess, don't look at the data or think about the data differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny that you didn't even get into the data privacy stuff, but there's always it's the nature of conversation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think those are all excellent points, and I would love to. Yeah, data privacy itself is like is a whole nother conversation, and like I think an important part of data literacy, and definitely an underlooked one, but maybe at another time. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to say?
The only thing that I'm certain of, as you said, the only thing I'm certain of is that I shouldn't be certain of anything, even that. Mm-hmm. Life is complicated, and there's all these things coming at us, and we aren't built to be perfect decision makers, and so we shouldn't expect ourselves to be.
Yeah, we're just human, so forgive yourself for being human.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not your fault you're here, and you shouldn't be punished. You shouldn't be punishing yourself for that, for your inherent, the way you are.
Yeah, yeah. And when you stop punishing yourself, it does go a long way to finding a little bit of harmony in your life.
Mm-hmm. And that can help you be and do what you want to do and be.
Yes,
yes. Being at peace with yourself helps you build out more pieces, I guess.
It really does. It really does. I love that we concluded on that. Thank you so much, Yossi, for joining me.
And absolutely. Thank you so much for having me again.
Of course. And thank you for watching and listening to us. If you're listening on YouTube or Spotify, make sure to like and share the podcast. Follow us on Instagram. And as always, embrace your chaos with kindness. Thank you so much.